Hello sweet people, my name is Gabor and welcome to my channel. In this series we are going to talk about the different lies and misconceptions about being. However, before we can tackle topics like humanity, the mind, social structure, sexuality, God, general perception of reality, we would need to define what on earth does it even mean to be. Like, it's a really broad concept, isn't it? And what better way to get to the bottom of this question than through philosophy? There is not really any other way to do it. So, let's jump right into it, shall we? The study of being in philosophy is called ontology and is the central topic of the part of philosophy which is called metaphysics. Now, the word metaphysics actually derives from Aristotle, but he wasn't really someone who used the word metaphysics. It's simply when they were collecting his works, like the things that were about the being, God, etc., these were the ones that came after the physics part. So metaphysics essentially doesn't mean anything else but the thing after physics. Now, usually philosophers differentiate between two senses of being. A primary one and a secondary one which derives from this primary one. There is a difference between things like material beings or our thoughts or the quality of the things or the values and the different principles, yet like all of these things are, but they are on a very different type of level of being. So it's not possible to say that my thoughts aren't, because I know very well that they are. However, my thoughts are absolutely only there because I am here, right? An example. For Plato, a primary kind of being is the immutable world of ideas, while for Aristotle it is the mutable world of substances. Still, Aristotle, and not just him, but also Thomas Aquinas in the future, put immutable substance to the principle of all being. So to say, the core that puts everything else into existence. The immutable substance is obviously God himself, or itself, or herself, whatever you prefer. Now, the two main, you could say absolute main, of course there are several, but absolute main ways of looking at this is in the materialistic philosophical way and the idealistic one. The main difference between these two is that materialists conceive material or sensible entity as the primary model of being, while idealists regard thought or spirituality as a primary. This already makes it fairly obvious that the approach of the question of being is determined by the way of thinking, right? The whole methodology. Like, if let's say I'm a physicist, and for me everything that is just physical. Or let's say I'm a Buddhist monk, then for me everything that is gonna be spiritual. And actually, to stay at the example of the Buddhist monk, the Eastern philosophy, for example, heavily emphasizes the role of non-being, while Heidegger, for example, approaches the question from a phenomenological aspect. So, just the whole general starting point, how you go at it, will determine your whole philosophy and your whole way of seeing it. But it's fairly obvious, isn't it? There seems to be one tiny consensus, however, which is the distinction between an essential world and a resultant world of phenomena. Still, they give different answers to which one of these worlds is more real. The physical one or this ideal one, so to say. Now, let's break it down into the history of Western philosophy. What did philosophers think about the being? What were the main ideas? During this era, the most important question wasn't so much what being is, but the main question they were trying to figure out was, what is the world even made of? What is the primary element? What it is that everything is built upon? Or you can even say that, what is the element that the world resembles the most? Now, according to Thales, that thing would be water. According to Anaximenes, that was air. And according to Heraclitus, it was fire. Now, after all of these guys came arguably the most important guy, or the guy who kicked into the motion a philosophical thought that then led the way for centuries, even millennia, for philosophers. And that guy was none other but Parmenides. Now, Parmenides did not actually discuss what being in itself really is, but instead highlighted the fact of being as the truth and characterized being as one all-inclusive, whole, timeless, immobile, immutable, permanent, and imperishable something. So because of that, any individual thing that looks changeable, perishable in the world are just illusions, right? They're just illusionary perceptions of the reality, but they are not really there, and they don't really belong in the realm of actual being. It's already fairly easy to see that the biggest contrast here is with Heraclitus, who understood fire as the ultimate element of reality. For in reality, just like fire, is an ever-changing thing. So therefore, any kind of stability or immutability or anything like that, really, like any kind of continuity, you could even say, is nothing else but a huge illusion. It's just a lie. Smoke and mirrors. Now come two guys that for sure everybody already heard about. Plato and Aristotle. Plato differentiated between two types of worlds, an immutable one, which is an eternal realm of ideas that are true beings, and a transitory one, which is a less real world of material beings that are subject to change and decay. Yeah, decay. There ain't no sugarcoating in philosophy. What this basically means is that you could say that he found like a middle ground between Parmenides and Heraclitus, right? Although it's fairly obvious that for Plato, the ideas are more important than the material world, right? That for him, the idealistical world is the primary one, and the material one is the secondary one. For Aristotle, the science of being as being was something that he called the first philosophy. Or you can call it being qua being, if you want to be fancy. Philosophers are just like bankers. They have to use fancy terms in order to confuse you and seem superior. For Aristotle, only individual things called substances, very important word, are fully beings, while other things such as quantity, quality, place, time, blah 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 blah, are categories, and these depend on the individual substance. But it doesn't end there though, as every substance is a composite of two principles, form and matter, or in other words you could say actuality and potentiality. To really oversimplify it, what this basically means is what a thing is and what it can potentially become. The only exception from this is, once again, God, who is the highest genus of substance, the one, the unmoving mover, right? He's never gonna change. He is just what he is. He already fulfilled his potential, I guess. You know, like that isn't much further than that. Makes sense? Now, during medieval times, medieval philosophers and medieval thinkers basically followed Aristotle's footsteps. However, there was one very important new idea, which is the idea of existence. However, this wasn't such a new idea actually, really, because it came from Islamic philosophy. Now, Thomas Aquinas completely adopted this idea and argued that essence and existence in finite creatures are distinct, while within God they are identical. This makes God the first being, and every other creature is a participated being that only exists because God exists. This indicates some sort of a similarity between God and every other being, right? Since if we derive from God, then there has to be some part of God in us. Not everybody was completely on board with this. So some argue that since God is a being who is just a being from itself, and we simple creatures are just beings derived from another one, we are two completely different types of beings without any kind of similarity whatsoever. During these times, a rationalist called Spinoza took a pantheistic approach of only one substance, that being God or nature, and this substance is the primary sense of being and referred to as modus or mode, as the derivative sense of every being. Substance is that which is in itself and is conceived through itself, while mode is the modification of substance, if you will, or that which exists in and conceived through something other than itself. However, he also pointed out that the being itself has no real proper definition. So, take it or leave it. By the way, Spinoza's book Ethics is one of the best, if not the best, philosophy books I've read from Western philosophers, like ever. It's not even that long, it's fairly easy to understand. I highly recommend it for everybody. So the point is that for Spinoza, a substance can only be something which is absolutely capable to exist in itself. So therefore it can only be God, and since he was a pantheistic, he viewed the whole nature as one as God. And this is actually very interesting from a Western philosopher, because it shows signs of like Eastern philosophical thoughts, fairly a lot in fact. Not too many, because he didn't really think about the ideas of non-being and whatnot, but still, like, he was fairly close to something that was a little bit more open-minded, let's put it this way, because that's my personal biggest problem with the whole Western philosophy as it is, not even just the being, but bloody everything, that it's incredibly close-minded. Okay, people, well, now is the time to go to the seventh piece of hell, also known as Hegel. Ugh. Why am I doing this to myself? Hegel is the guy who, when you study philosophy, basically just makes you want to scream into your pillow like there's no tomorrow and just say fuck it, go to the pub and drink with your friends because you will just never get it. And then eventually you get it, but what's the point? Because it doesn't really make sense. I mean, it does make sense, but it's like this fucking circle that he's proposing that being is, and you're like, yeah, sure, but why do you have to put it this fucking complicated? Alright, anyway. So, let's dive into it. I will be honest with you. Hegel is about as complex as it gets, pretty much. I mean, you still have Heidegger and stuff like that, but still, like, he's one of the tough nuts to crack with his cycle of the being and the non-being and the becoming, and yeah, so it's just tricky. It's just tricky. Instead of screwing up, I had the great idea of looking up something that maybe summarizes it better than I could, which, haha, I found something. So I'm just gonna read it word by word, what I found. Link is gonna be in the description. Check it out. Buckle up. This is gonna be a tough ride. For absolute idealist Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, being coincides with thought because the subject matter of philosophy is the life of the absolute spirit, self-thinking thought, as manifested panentheistically in the universe. The absolute spirit manifests itself in the universe by going out of itself and returning to itself. This life of the absolute spirit has three main phases: itself, nature, and the human spirit, and they are dealt with by logic, the philosophy of nature, and the philosophy of spirit respectively. Thus, logic deals with how the absolute spirit conceives itself before the creation of the universe. Logic begins with being, which is the most immediate and indeterminate concept the absolute spirit can formulate about itself. But being is so completely indeterminate that it passes over into non-being or nothing. It's negation, which is also completely indeterminate. Non-being also easily moves back to being. So a third category, becoming, is posited, which is the synthesis at a higher level of being as thesis and non-being as antithesis. While being and non-being are wholly indeterminate abstractions, becoming is the first concrete thought, thus being able to become determinate being, which is a definite being. Although notions such as being in itself, being for itself, and being in and for itself are also developed from determinate being, the original dialectic of being, non-being, and becoming is the starting point of the whole dialectic life of the absolute spirit that involves all the other senses of being, through the triads of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis at various phases and subphases. Yeah! Husserl was the one who recognized that the different kinds of beings, such as normative beings, time, space, etc., exist in different senses. He was the one who created the foundation to the idea of a transcendental ego or pure consciousness. What this basically means is that every being, may it be an object or time for example, is determined by how it presents its sense to us. Heidegger argued that Western philosophy couldn't define the being properly because they were still stuck in the ideas of Plato and Aristotle, so basically still stuck in this very materialistic approach, with which, by the way, I couldn't agree more. When talking about the meaning of being, Heidegger put great importance into death and the conscience. By being confronted with the non-being, which he called nichts, which by the way in German means nothing, as in the word nothing, the human being can grasp the meaning of the being. For him, existence is the same as the there being, the Dasein, as he called it. As he put it, the essence of Dasein lies in its existence. By the way, fun fact about Heidegger, he hated the modern world and also said that we got so distracted that we forgot that we are alive and how to live. Which, I mean, you can trace that very well in his philosophy. Alright, and now, more or less the only thing that we are left with are the existentialists, which are the guys that are crazy popular these days. Can't imagine why. We're talking about the guys like Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and Sartre. They were more interested in the human aspect of the being than in the being in general. They explored topics of the human existence like freedom, anxiety, fate, destiny, good and evil, faith, or belief. Because for them, being was completely intertwined with dealing with values, as those of the values of ethics and aesthetics, or even religion. So it's easy to see why so many people read them, or at least pretend to read them. And that's about it. Congratulations, you've done it. What was it, like 15 minutes, maybe? I don't know, should be something like that. That's more or less all we need from Western philosophy. And as you can see, it's sometimes kind of painful. I'm not like over-exaggerating here. Like, it's been about a decade that I came out of the university and I almost pretty much forgot how much I hated some of this stuff, but now I remember it quite vividly again. Sure, it has some good ideas. And if I want to be honest, I believe the book Ethics from Spinoza is one of the best works there is, truly. So there are definitely some gems in there. However, when it comes to the questions of being or the consciousness, there is no better place to look for answers than in the Eastern philosophies. So let's talk about those really briefly. Why briefly? Well, because in future episodes we are going to talk about them a lot. Now, one of the main and biggest differences between the East and the West is that the East, they deal way more with the notion of the non-being. In Hinduism, the being is called Sat and the non-being is called Asat, where Sat is the enduring reality, the supreme cosmic power, the Brahman, and Asat is the illusory unreality of the manifested universe. Now, as you can see, the approach is very different from the one from the West. Here, matter is just an illusion and not a being or something that truly is. But as said, we're going to talk about it in detail in the future. But the point is that here it's the spiritual world that's real, it's the transcendental one that's real, and this one, the ones that we can touch, that's not real at all. That's just an illusion. Now in Buddhism, and I'm talking general Buddhism here, not Mahayana, Vajrayana, or any of these kind of different branches. No, Buddhism in general. Everything in the world is marked by three main characteristics. The impermanence, which is called anicca in Sanskrit, meaning that everything will eventually cease to exist and also that everything is constantly changing. Other one is the unsatisfactoriness, which is called dukkha. Now, fun fact, This word actually means bad whole, and not just any kind of whole, but a very, very specific type of whole. But I will explain it in the future, and no, it's not that type of whole. Shame on you, you filthy pig. Dukkha means that nothing in this physical world can bring any kind of everlasting satisfaction. Essentially, this is what it means. And the third one would be the non-self, the anatman. The combination of these three basically means that nothing is permanent and everything is dependent on each other on several levels. From these thoughts come one of the most important ideas of Buddhism, which is the shunyata, which means emptiness. However, I'd like to point out that this does not mean that things are completely empty and thereby meaningless. What it means is that they could become anything. It means that they have endless potential. Now there are of course still many others, just like Confucianism and Taoism, but I'd say that was already enough for today. Thank you very, very much for spending time with me. I hope you learned something and had at least a little bit of fun. Thank you for your patience in listening to this super dry topic. In the next episode we are going to talk about Buddhism. That will be much more entertaining and way less complicated. I assure you that. Until then, stay strong, stay free, and think for yourself. Oh, you're still here? Lovely. Well, in that case, if you wanna subscribe, subscribe. If you wanna give a thumbs up, that's cool. If you wanna give a thumbs down, that's also cool, whichever suits you. And what the best thing would be if you could leave a comment. Let me know what you think about this topic. Let me know what you think about being. Let's have a conversation. That's the only way to be smarter anyway. Alright then. Have a good one, and I'll see you later.